So I'm thrilled to speak today with Kate Turner, who is an artist and scholar working across disciplines, including performance, writing, music, exhibition curation, and public and academic folklore. She is not only noted for her work in folklore and performance, but also for her feminist writings and performances on subjects such as women's home altars, fairy tale witches, and historical goddess figures. She co founded Girls in the Nose, a lesbian feminist rock punk band, and earned her PhD or Master and PhD, respectively, in folklore and anthropology at the University of Texas at Austin. The most significant amongst her many publications is The Beautiful Necessity, a book, Beautiful Necessity, The Art and Meaning of Women's Altars from 1991, which is a study of home altars and vernacular altars as an aesthetic form. Kay has led many important institutions and associations related to public folklore. She was the director of folk arts at the Brooklyn Arts Council and served as president of the American Folklore Society. She is also professor in the Department of Performance Studies at Tisch School of the Arts. Kay once said, and I quote, "To be a folklorist is to be entrusted with a diverse body of critical cultural knowledge, art, and practice," unquote. And so I believe that we'll greatly profit from asking her to share some of her knowledge by answering our two questions. The first one, can performance be conserved? If so, how? And if not, why? And the second, what does it mean to conserve performance? Okay.
Great. Thank you, Hannah, for inviting me today. This is a great project. It opens up territory for discussion about performance and conserving performance in many different arenas of my own practice. Um, so I think I'll start a little bit in left field by simply saying that as a performer, as someone who has led bands and done that kind of songwriting and singing and has been in a club giving a show to all the hot, sweaty bodies that are dancing in front of me, I really do think that that cannot be conserved. That can only be lived. And performance is first and foremost the lived enactment of the doing and being of life in the human and non-human and special crossover, arenas of life on Earth, on the planet. So I think it is important to take a stand about the non-conservability of performance when it is contributing to the life force in the moment in which it's being conveyed. It cannot be conserved in that moment. But a record, of course, can be made. And that's to a certain extent what all of us are involved in, making these records of performances of various kinds. So I think to sort of move a little bit closer to the work that I've done in folklore, I've been concerned very much about ephemeral manifestations in folklore. And that's where the altars practice really, it really engaged me because I never saw the altar as a fixed thing. It was always an activator to get other stuff done. So, if a woman made a prayer to La Virgen de Guadalupe in front of her altar, she was praying to a manifestation of, the deity form, and she was asking for that deity to serve her as she serves the deity. So there's an exchange at the altar place, and the performance is all about this kind of exchange. So I got very interested in that exchange, the ephemerality of it, the way that the very notion that the prayer and the thing that was being asked for and the thing that was being returned was all within the context of disappearing acts, things that couldn't be, that couldn't be repeated. But the thing that is also important about the altar traditions, and this is true of religion in so many ways, and why religion plays such a very profound role around performance, is that performances can be repeated through ritual. And ritual is what gives us an entree into conserving important performances that get certain kinds of life business done. So, that prayer by that woman at that altar, she on the one hand recites an oración, which is an oration that is been handed down to her over time from her mother, her grandmother. This is the oration you say to Guadalupe. On the other hand, she says that oration and then she just starts chatting with, the Virgin, telling her daily life, telling her problems. Here's what I need from you today. I'll help you, I'll give some money to the poor, or I'll build a shrine for you in my backyard, or what, I'll do something for you if you do something for me. But again, so formal scripts that are passed down in tradition. And this, we're talking about song, music, theatrical, recipes for food, all the kinds of things, the texts that come to us informally in the folk life that we all lead, right? The life that we lead in our domestic and personal and, communal and community lives, no matter who we are. Those performances are to a certain extent helped in their conservation by, by ritual, by repetition, by things that start to accumulate over time. So, you have a child, you give your child your repertoire of stuff, right? And that child goes, oh, I'll take some of that repertoire from mom, but not the rest. And so he or she goes on, or they go on, and they, have their, they create a new repertoire, but it has repertoire in it from mom and dad. I mean, I'm just trying to be really simple and trying to, say how profound the question is that you're asking, because it has a very wide range of play. And I mean, we could talk about ritual more, but ritual, in the meaning of the term is, it's the thing done. The Greeks did ritual to accomplish something, to get something done between them and the gods, right? To ensure, it was an insurance of, the next crop or whatever. But the thing is, it's always a performance. It can't just be done in words. It has to be done with the body. So that's where we also come into this territory too, of that most performances are done with the body, or an instrument that the body, sort of engages with. And the ritual body is a body that, again, is filled with local knowledge, filled with knowledge that has been transmitted in some way and kept in repertoire. This is what Diana Taylor talks about, the archive and repertoire, where she makes this distinction between the repertoire that is housed within us, and the very important repertoire that she refers to, of course, is the repertoire of those who had been colonized, that they maintained their own repertoire of the life that they had lived before being invaded in Mexico, before being, quote unquote conquered. They were actually, invaded. They had their lives, their sources of performed knowledge taken away from them, or told, their temples were taken down, their rituals were, made illegal, they were, killed. But despite that, as Diana, demonstrates in really amazing ways in her book, that I highly recommend, the repertoire is still retained through performance. So this is the inverse that is really a rich arena to, you know, to talk about as well, where the repertoire itself becomes a source of conservation. And I saw this many, many times in my work in folklore as a public folklorist here in Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Arts Council. I did a big project that went on for many years called Folk Feet. It was on traditional dance. So I learned in different communities across Brooklyn, from the Yemeni to the to the various African communities, African American to Puerto Rican, Dominican, lots of different different communities where dance was practiced and where dance was brought in the immigration process from the homeland, and how it was conserved, and also varied, but how everyone could always point to the thing that was the old thing, right? The thing that, was conserved in the footwork. And then the footwork might be changed slightly, to incorporate something new, a little bit of Brooklyn in the footwork, right? But I think it's very important to see the body as the primary source of conservation of performance. And that is, again, that's certainly the territory that performance studies, the discipline of performance studies that I teach in at NYU, that's one of our primary principles. In folklore, the body has gotten more and more play in recent years. It used to be that what folklore really concentrated on was the transmission of texts and the transmission of oral knowledge, narrative, legend, song, fairy tales, myths, all of the stuff that was pretty much came through the mouth, right? But the mouth and the body are, of a piece, right? So, I mean, they're working together. And so I would certainly say that these are these more ephemeral sites. These are not the sites that we can investigate in quite the same way that we would by, let's say, you can do a video of a dance, and you can look at it, 100 times and parse it and see what it's made of, and and then you can write the notes up, and you can put that video in an archive and conserve that performance and give it context, and all that kind of stuff. And that's really important too. That's, especially building archives of, people who have been marginalized by the dominant culture is extremely important. Because as we know, one of those shifting sands of performance conservation has to do with who is conserved, what is conserved, who gets to be conserved, right? And it's not always, and rarely is, this is that great thing about, the myth of the, the Grimm's fairy tales, where, everybody likes to think that the Grimm's were out there collecting from, the folk and all that kind of stuff. Well, they were collecting from their middle-class friends, but the middle-class friends and daughters of the people that they associated with were getting the tales from their nannies and the cooks, who are anonymous to us, right? We know who some of the family members are who told the Yakov and Ludwig the tales, but we don't know their sources, because those sources were these people who conserve knowledge but are never given credit for it.
What does it really mean, to conserve performance?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. What does it mean to conserve? Well, as I was kind of pointing to, I think what we kind of get into with that question is the politics of it, because the meaning of conservation is of conserving performance is wedded to this question of who gets to be conserved, what gets to be, what's counted as conservable. And so I think, for example, in performance studies, there's been, a lot of discussion around this more recently. Um, this would be the work of people like Fred Moten and Deborah Caption and uh, other colleagues in the department and other, Rebecca Schneider. I think these scholars in performance studies are more and more interested in this question that meaning doesn't come out of theory, it comes out of practice, and who gets to do the practicing, um, and who is who is prevented from doing it, or who is just not counted as, um, in the mix, right? Um, so I think there, what performance studies has done, I think quite brilliantly over its, 50-year history or so. It's, as you know, it's a very young discipline in comparison to all the others, like anthropology and folklore and art history and that kind of thing. But certainly I think performance studies has, because it has opened up this territory of everyday performance as being, central to the theoretical concerns of performance studies. It has also given a much, sort of wider lens on the meaning of performance. That performance um, is is something that happens in so many different arenas and ways, and that a lot of it is, it's water flowing in the river, of life. But, what performance studies does is isolate, those moments to a certain extent for investigation and analysis in ways that I think are very, very fruitful. Um, so, yeah, so I think that theoretically, um, you know, I think there needs to be more theory um, kind of developed along the lines um, that were kind of initiated, by Bordeaux and, the whole habitus idea, the kind of, the whole way of looking at how performance is conserved within its domains, its various, its various places of practice. um, I think that, I'm just trying to think here of some of the, the more intangible uh, performance practices that Jose Munoz worked on in his book Cruising Utopia, where, you know, where I think some of the theory that comes out of that book that's very useful for this discussion has to do with accepting, accepting the ways in which incompletion is something that we have to feel okay about. We have to know that conservation can never be complete. It's always, it's always in the process of being completed, but it really can't be finished. And his book about queer utopia, kind of speaks to that. He says that queerness is never, it's always on the horizon. It's never really, it's never really here. It's always out there, and we're always moving toward it. But I think that that's a very, very useful idea. Another person that I've been reading quite a bit of lately is Salamisha Tillett. Her book, Sites of Slavery, is a really, really interesting treatment of performance at sites of slavery. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but she does a spectacular job of looking at certain places, in Ghana, which have become very famous as tourists go to, to see the places, the slave holding cells and everything where people were kept before they were put on the ships and sent to the Americas and all that. But she does a very interesting treatment of that phenomenon, the tourist phenomenon of doing that, and what that says about the performance of the tourists, the people who are going, why they're going, and why they're engaging in a kind of performance within these sites. There's so many people doing such interesting work along these lines, that yeah, I could give you more bibliography, I guess, but I'm just suggesting that one place to, I think, theorize some of the issues around conserving performance are going to be found in some of these other, these other kinds of texts, and that we might not necessarily look at first, but there's some, there's a lot to explore. Carolyn Dinshaw is another one. Her work is really, really interesting because she looks at temporality. We haven't even really talked about temporality, but she looks at temporality in performance. So she's very interested in she's a medievalist, but she got very interested in amateur medievalists who dress up and, reenact medieval scenes and stuff like that in these big festivals that are done. So she got very interested in how there's stuff to lime in her work about the whole way that these people who we tend to look at as kind of, what are they doing? They too are conservators. They're conserving, they're conserving their own ideas of what a performance of medievalism looked like, 400, 500 years ago. There's just a lot of work out there that's, really interesting.
Okay, thank you so